My name is Anna, and I was 17 the night my mother told me I was being sent to live with my aunt in another country. Not for summer, not for school, because I was too difficult for her marriage, for her reputation, for her life. 15 years later, I built a career abroad they never believed I could have. And when I finally came home, my parents hugged me at the door as if they had never made me leave, as if the exile had been my idea. Before I tell you what happened when I started asking the wrong questions, tell me, where are you watching from right now? I want to know how far this story travels. Family I grew up in was built on edited history. My mother was the editor, my father the silent proofreader, my younger brother the golden excerpt. I was the chapter they tried to remove. Sent to Spain at 17 with no language and no safety net, I built a life abroad. When I returned 15 years later, my parents acted as if I had chosen to leave, as if the exile had been my idea. The dinner my mother arranged to welcome me back was not a reconciliation. It was a performance. And the man my mother was trying hardest to impress would become the one who finally exposed the truth. I was born into a family that looked perfect from the outside. My father was a surgeon, my mother a society consultant. We lived in a house where every room was decorated for guests, not for us. My mother, Clara, ran the family the way she ran her charity galas, with an iron hand wrapped in velvet. She decided what stories got told, what emotions were allowed, and which of her children would carry the family's pride forward. That child was my younger brother, Matteo. Matteo was easy. He smiled when he was supposed to. He achieved without threatening anyone. He fit into the frame she built. I did not. I asked questions. I wanted to know why my mother's affection seemed to have a thermometer, hot when I performed well in public, cold when I wanted something for myself. I was 12 when I first noticed the pattern. She would praise me in front of her friends for my piano recital, then spend the car ride home listing everything I had done wrong. By the time I was 15, I had learned that her love was a transaction. Compliance bought warmth. Independence bought silence. The trouble started when I refused to study law. My father had attended the same university as his father. My brother was already being groomed for a similar path. When I said I wanted to study art history and languages, my mother laughed, not a warm laugh. The kind that tells you your dreams are ridiculous. I did not back down. That was my first mistake. My second was telling her I had applied to a university abroad. I had saved my own money from tutoring. I had written the essays in secret. When the acceptance letter arrived, I thought she might be proud. Instead, she sat me down in the kitchen and explained that I was being destabilizing. She said my behavior was putting stress on the marriage, on Matteo's future, on the family name. She told me I needed structure, discipline, humility. She told me I was going to my aunt in Spain. My Aunt Isabella lived in a small apartment outside Valencia. My mother framed it as an educational opportunity, learning Spanish, gaining perspective. There was no discussion. My father stood in the doorway of my room while I packed silent. He handed me an envelope with cash and said, "Your mother thinks this is for the best." He would not look at me. That was the last moment I felt anything close to pity for him. The day I left, my brother was at a tennis tournament. My mother kissed my cheek and said, "This will be good for you. You'll learn to appreciate what you had." She was already looking past me, toward the car that would take me away. She did not cry. She never cried. I was 17 years old and I had been removed from the family like a tumor. Spain broke me open. My aunt was kind but distant. She had her own life, her own grief. I did not speak the language. I could not understand the bus system. I cried every night for the first 3 months, not because I missed home, but because I finally understood that home had never been safe. That realization hardened something inside me. I learned Spanish in 6 months by watching television and reading newspapers aloud. I found a job at a bookstore. I enrolled in the local university with the money I had saved and a scholarship I fought for. I did not call my parents for the first 2 years. They did not call me either. By the time I was 25, I was working for an international firm in Barcelona, translating and interpreting in 4 languages. I had built a life from nothing. I had friends who knew me without the filter of my mother's narrative. I had a partner who loved me without conditions. I thought I had escaped, but the silence had its own weight. I started wondering, not whether they missed me, but whether they ever admitted what they had done. Whether my mother ever told anyone the truth about why I left. I was 32 when I received a letter from my father. Not an email, not a call. A handwritten letter, the first I had ever received from him. He said my mother's health was declining. He He said Mateo was engaged to a woman from a prominent political family. He said they wanted me to come home for the engagement dinner. He wrote, "Your mother would like to see you, she has changed." I read that sentence 5 times. She has changed. It sounded like a script he had been told to follow. I did not answer for a month, then my brother called. He sounded older, more polished, but underneath that, I heard the same boy who never had to fight for anything. He said the dinner was important. He said his fiancée's father was a federal judge. He said my presence would complete the picture. Those were his exact words, not "I miss you," not "we were wrong." Complete the picture. I was being invited back as a prop. I agreed to go, not because I believed them, because I wanted to see with my own eyes whether the family I had been exiled from had ever changed, or whether they had simply gotten better at pretending. I flew back to the city I had left 15 years earlier. The airport had been renovated. The streets looked smaller. The house looked the same, except the garden had been redesigned to impress. My mother greeted me at the door with a hug so tight it felt rehearsed. She said, "You look wonderful. So European." She did not say she was sorry. She did not mention the 17-year-old girl who had been sent away with no goodbye. The dinner was scheduled for that Saturday at a restaurant owned by a friend of the family. My mother had been planning it for weeks. She sent me the dress code twice. She called to confirm my arrival time 3 times. She was not anxious about me. She was anxious about the optics. The judge, his wife, my brother's future in-laws, these were the people she needed to impress. I was a variable she needed to control. The morning of the dinner, my mother sat me down in the kitchen where she had exiled me 15 years earlier. She said, "Tonight is important for Mateo. Please let things be simple. Do not bring up the past. Do not make this about you." She said it with the same calm authority she had always used. She was not asking. She was warning me. I looked at her and realized nothing had changed. The house had been repainted. The garden had been redesigned. But the rules were identical. I was still the inconvenient chapter. I agreed to play along. I told myself it was one night. I told myself I was stronger now. But I knew, the moment I walked into that restaurant, that I was not there as a daughter. I was there as a piece of choreography. And the choreographer was about to discover that the dancer she had sent away had learned a different routine. The man my mother was trying hardest to impress, Judge Arturo Herrera, arrived early. He was tall, silver-haired, with the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades deciding who was telling the truth. He shook my hand and held my gaze a second longer than necessary. He asked what I did for a living. I told him. His eyebrows lifted. He asked a follow-up question. And then another. By the time my mother rushed over to steer the conversation toward Mateo's accomplishments, the judge was no longer looking at her. He was looking at me. He said, "I think I read your testimony in the Vega case, the translation work for the European Tribunal." I nodded. My mother's face went pale. She had no idea what the Vega case was. She had no idea I had been featured in international legal proceedings. She had spent 15 years pretending I did not exist, and now the one man whose approval she needed had just found out that I existed in a world she could not touch. The first course had not even been served, and the performance was already falling apart. But the worst was yet to come. Before the night ended, Judge Herrera would say something that would shatter every lie my mother had carefully constructed, and I would be the one who made it necessary. The restaurant was called El Faro, an old converted lighthouse on the edge of the city's oldest district. My mother had chosen it because its history matched the image she wanted to project: centuries old, family-owned, exclusive by reputation rather than by price tag. The private dining room on the second floor had windows that faced the sea, and the table had been arranged with the precision of a military operation. Name cards, crystal. A floral centerpiece that must have cost more than my first month's rent in Barcelona. I arrived deliberately last, not to make an entrance but to limit the time I would have to spend performing pre-dinner pleasantries. My mother was already in position at the head of the table, her smile fixed like a photograph. My father sat to her right, his hands folded over a napkin he had not yet opened. Mateo stood near the windows with a woman I assumed was his fiancée, Adelia, elegant, dark-haired, wearing a dress that probably cost more than my suit. She smiled when I entered, but her eyes were watchful. She had been briefed about me, I could tell. The question was whether she had been told the truth. Judge Herrera was not yet seated. He stood near the bar at the far end of the room, speaking quietly with his wife, a composed woman with silver hair and the posture of someone who had spent years attending formal events she did not fully enjoy. When he saw me, he excused himself and walked over. He did not shake my hand this time. He simply said, "I looked you up, the National Court of Auditors reference. The translation work on the Gibraltar Treaty arbitration. That was you." He said it as a statement, not a question. He was testing whether I would deflect or own it. "I owned it. That was a team effort," I said. "But yes, I handled the Spanish-English certification." He nodded slowly. "I remember the ruling. Your work was cited in the preliminary opinion." My mother appeared at my elbow. "Archero, please sit. We have such a wonderful menu planned. The chef here does an exceptional hake." She was trying to break the moment, to redirect his attention toward the safe territory of food and wine. Judge Herrera ignored her. He pulled out the chair beside me and sat down even though his name card was on the opposite side of the table. His wife raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She took the seat he had abandoned. The dinner began with all the small talk I had expected. The wine was discussed. The appetizer was praised. Mateo told a story about a golf tournament. Adelia's mother asked about the weather. But the fault line had already opened. Every time I spoke, Judge Herrera leaned in. When my mother tried to speak for me, he turned his full attention back to me and waited for my answer. The second course arrived, a seafood bisque. My mother attempted to reclaim control by asking about my life in Spain in a tone that suggested she already knew the answer and found it mildly embarrassing. "Do you still live in that little apartment? You never sent pictures." I did not take the bait. "I moved 3 years ago. I own a place now, near the Gothic Quarter." "You bought property." My father said it as if I had confessed to a crime. "I bought an apartment. It's small, but it's mine." Judge Herrera set down his spoon. "In the Gothic Quarter, that district carries a premium. The restoration regulations alone are demanding. That is not a casual investment." I met his eyes. "I worked for it. 7 years of cases, certifications, and freelance contracts. I saved, I planned, I waited." He smiled, and there was something like approval in it. That is how serious people build, slowly, without permission. The words landed like a stone in still water. My mother's face tightened. She knew exactly what he was implying. He was saying that I had built something real without her help, without her blessing, without even her knowledge, and that the person she had exiled had become precisely the kind of person this powerful man respected. Mateo tried to rescue the conversation. "Ana always had strong opinions. It's good to see she found an outlet for them." It was the most dismissive compliment I had ever heard. Judge Herrera turned his gaze toward my brother and held it for a long moment before replying. "Your sister's work has been cited in international tribunals. I do not think outlet is the word." The table went quiet. Adelia looked at Mateo with an expression I could not read. Curiosity, maybe. Discomfort, definitely. My mother picked up her wine glass and took a long drink. She was calculating, I could see it. She was deciding whether to change the subject or to attack. She chose attack disguised as concern. Ana was always very driven, sometimes too driven. We worried about her. That's why we encouraged her to spend time abroad, to find balance. Encouraged, the word hung in the air like a lie wrapped in silk. I kept my voice even. "You sent me away. I was 17. I had a suitcase and 1,000 euros. There was no discussion. There was no encouragement. You told me I was destabilizing the family and that I needed to learn humility. That is what happened." The silence that followed was absolute. My father stared at the tablecloth. Mateo looked like he had been slapped. My mother's smile cracked at the edges and then reassembled itself. "I do not remember it that way," she said softly. She said it the way she always said it, as if memory were a matter of opinion and hers was the only one that counted. Judge Herrera did not look at her. He looked at me, and I saw something in his face that I had not expected. Recognition, not of my career but of my story. He said, "I grew up in a family that preferred its own version of events. It took me 40 years to stop apologizing for the truth." That was the pivot. That was the moment the dinner stopped being a performance and became a reckoning. My mother had expected Judge Herrera to ally with her, to see me as the difficult child whose exile was justified. Instead, he had just publicly aligned himself with me. And he had done it without raising his voice, without drama, without giving her anything she could argue against without looking foolish. My mother tried to recover. She laughed, a brittle sound. Archero, you are too kind. Families are complicated. We all have different perspectives. Some perspectives are more accurate than others, he replied. He turned back to me. Tell me about the recognition of foreign qualifications case, the one that went to the Supreme Court last year. I told him. I explained how I had been contracted as an independent expert to certify the equivalence of legal credentials between Spanish and British systems after Brexit. It was dry material, but I made it precise. He asked follow-up questions that showed he understood the legal architecture better than most lawyers I knew. We talked for 10 minutes while the rest of the table ate in silence. The food was excellent. No one tasted it. Adelia's mother, who had said almost nothing all evening, finally spoke. Ana, how long were you in Spain before you found work in your field? 3 years before I got my first professional contract. I studied, I worked retail, I translated documents for cash. It took time. And your family helped you during that period? It was an innocent question, but it was also a knife. She was asking whether my parents had supported me financially or emotionally during the years of struggle. The answer, of course, was no. They had not called. They had not visited. They had not sent money. I had been erased. I answered honestly, no, they did not. My mother spoke quickly. We thought independence would be good for her. She needed to find her own way. That must have been difficult, Adelia's mother said. Her voice was neutral, but her eyes were not. She was looking at my mother the way people look at someone whose story has just developed a hole. Mateo cleared his throat. Can we change the subject? This is supposed to be a celebration. Is it? I asked. I had not planned to say it. The words came out on their own. What exactly are we celebrating? Mateo's face reddened. My engagement, our families coming together, the future. The future you built with support, encouragement, and resources, while I was building mine alone in a country where I knew no one. I said it without anger. That was what made it devastating. There was no heat in my voice, no accusation, just fact. Judge Herrera spoke again. May I ask a direct question? I nodded. Did you ever want to come home? The question was simple. It was also the first time anyone in that room had asked me what I wanted, not what was convenient for the family, not what would make a good story, what I wanted. I answered honestly. I wanted to come home for the first 5 years. I wanted them to call me and say they had made a mistake. I wanted to believe that they missed me, but the call never came, and after a while I stopped waiting. I built a home somewhere else. I built a family of people who chose me. My father raised his head. His eyes were wet. He opened his mouth and closed it again. My mother grabbed his arm under the table, a gesture so quick I almost missed it. She was still controlling him, even now. Mateo stood up. I think we need some air. He walked out onto the terrace. Adelia followed him. The terrace door clicked shut behind them, and through the glass I could see them arguing in low, urgent voices. The performance was unraveling, and my mother was losing control of the one audience that mattered. But the night was not over. Judge Herrera had not yet said the words that would change everything. He would speak again before dessert, and when he did, the last pillar of my mother's carefully constructed reality would collapse. Mateo and Adelia returned from the terrace. Her eyes were red. His jaw was tight. Whatever they had said to each other out there had not repaired anything. My brother sat down without looking at me. Adelia sat beside him but pushed her chair a few inches farther from his. Small movements, loud meaning. Judge Herrera broke the silence. He did not ask for permission. He simply spoke, and the table stopped breathing to listen. Clara, I want to ask you something directly. You have every right not to answer, but I would like you to hear the question first. My mother's smile was painted on. Of course, Archero, we are among friends. When Ana was 17, what exactly happened? I would like your version. She laughed, but it came out wrong. My version, there is no version, she was struggling. We thought a change would help her. A change to another country, alone. She had family there, my sister. Your sister who had not spoken to you in 8 years at that point. The room went cold. I did not know that. I had never known my mother and Isabella were estranged. I turned to look at my mother. Her face was stone now. The smile had finally died. "Who told you that?" she asked. "Isabella herself. I represented her in a property dispute 6 years ago. She mentioned you once. Briefly. She said you had stopped speaking after she disagreed with how you raised your children." My mother's hands were gripping the edge of the table. "You never told me you knew my sister." "You never asked, and I did not realize the connection until tonight. Anna mentioned her aunt in Valencia. I made the link. Then I remembered the case, and I remembered what Isabella said. She said you sent your daughter to her without warning, without resources, and without instructions. She said the girl arrived in a state of shock. She said you did not call to check on her for 2 years." My father's fork clattered against his plate. He looked at my mother, and for the first time I saw something other than submission in his face. He looked confused. "Is that true?" he asked. She rounded on him. "Do not start, you agreed to everything." "I agreed to send her to Spain for a year. I did not agree to cut her off." "You never disagreed with anything. You sat in your study and let me handle everything. Do not pretend you have principles now." I watched the marriage fracture in real time. It was not dramatic. It was clinical. Two people who had built a partnership on complicity finally revealing the terms of their contract. He had given her silence. She had given him a clean house. And both of them had sacrificed me to maintain the peace. Judge Herrera's wife spoke for the first time in an hour. "Clara, I am not a judge. I am a mother. And I am trying to understand why a mother would send her 17-year-old daughter to another country and not speak to her for 2 years. What could justify that?" My mother did not answer. I answered for her. I asked too many questions. I did not fit the narrative. I refused to be grateful for crumbs. And when I stopped performing the role she assigned me, I became a threat to the story she wanted to tell about our family. So she deleted me. "Deleted," Judge Herrera repeated. "That is a strong word." "It is the accurate word." Mateo slammed his hand on the table. "Enough. This is supposed to be a celebration of my engagement. You are destroying it." "No," Adelia said. "Your mother destroyed it years ago. We are just finding out about it now." Everyone turned to look at her. She was crying silently. She did not wipe the tears away. "I knew something was wrong," she continued. "Mateo never talked about his sister. When I asked, he changed the subject. When I pressed, he said you were difficult. But I have spent the last 2 hours watching you, Anna. You are not difficult. You are precise. You are honest. And you have been erased from your own family. That is not your fault. That is theirs." Mateo stared at her. "Adelia, please." "No, I need to know. If we get married, if we have children, will you do the same thing to them? Will you send them away when they stop being convenient?" "Of course not." "How do I know that? You never told me the truth about your sister. You let me believe she was distant by choice. You let me believe she did not want to be here. And she has been in your life the whole time, waiting for you to call." The table splintered into separate conversations. Adelia's mother was speaking quietly to her husband. My father was staring at his hands. Mateo was pleading with Adelia in a low voice. And my mother sat frozen, her mask gone, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere above my head. I stood up. I did it slowly, deliberately. I picked up my napkin and set it on the table. I smoothed my jacket. I looked at each person in turn. "I came here because I wanted to see if anything had changed. I was wrong. Nothing has changed. You are still telling the same story, protecting the same image, sacrificing the same people. The only difference is that now there are witnesses." I turned to Judge Herrera. "Thank you for seeing me. That is more than my family ever did." I turned to my mother. "You told me to stay quiet tonight. I did not stay quiet, and I will never be quiet again. Whatever story you tell about this dinner tomorrow, know this, I will not help you maintain it. I am done being edited out of my own life." I walked toward the door. My mother's voice stopped me. "Ganes." I stopped but did not turn around. "If you leave now, do not expect to come back." "I know," I said. "That is what you said 15 years ago, and I survived. I built a life. I became someone you do not even know, so keep your door closed. I have my own now." I stepped out of the private dining room, down the spiral stairs, and into the cold night air. The sea was dark. The lighthouse light swept across the water in a steady arc. I stood there for a long moment, feeling the weight of 15 years lift off my shoulders. I had told the truth. I had not protected them, and I had not disappeared. But the story was not over. The fallout from that dinner would spread further than I expected. Within a week, Judge Herrera would make a call that would change my professional life. Within a month, my mother would attempt something I never thought she would do. And within a year, I would learn the most painful truth of all, that the exile had been planned long before I was 17, that I had never been a daughter. I had been a problem to be solved. And the solution had been chosen for me the day I was born. I flew back to Barcelona the next morning. I did not tell anyone I was leaving. I simply left a key at the front desk of the hotel and took the first flight out. The city looked different from the window of the plane. Smaller, less powerful. I had left as an exile. I was returning as someone who had finally understood the full shape of her own story. 3 days later, Judge Herrera called me. He did not mention the dinner. He said he had a case coming before the European Court of Human Rights that required an independent expert with my exact qualifications. He said the pay was substantial. He said the deadline was tight. He said he trusted my judgment. I took the contract without negotiating. I knew what he was doing. He was giving me a door that my family had nailed shut. The case consumed me for 6 months. It involved a complex question of language rights and due process in a cross-border extradition. My work required me to certify translations, analyze legal equivalencies, and testify before a panel in Strasbourg. I did not think about my family during those months. Or rather, I thought about them the way you think about a scar that has finally healed. The tissue is different. The sensation is gone, but you know exactly where it used to be. Then the letter arrived. It was from my father, handwritten like the first one he had sent years earlier, but this time it was different. He did not mention my mother. He did not ask me to come home. He wrote only about himself. He said he had left the house. He said he was living in a small apartment near the university where he had studied as a young man. He said he had spent 30 years deferring to a woman whose version of reality he had never questioned, and that he had woken up at 63 to discover he did not know his own daughter. He wrote, "I am not asking for forgiveness. I am asking if you would be willing to let me know you, on your terms, at your pace, even if it takes the rest of my life." I sat with that letter for 2 weeks before I answered. I did not say yes. I said, "I will meet you in a public place. No agenda, no expectations. If you try to speak for my mother, I will leave." We met at a cafe in Valencia, halfway between his city and mine. He looked older, smaller. His hands shook when he set down his coffee cup. He did not try to hug me. He did not apologize in the way I had always imagined he would. Instead, he told me the truth. The exile had not been my mother's idea alone. It had been discussed for years. My father had agreed because he believed I would fail and return contrite. He said he never expected me to succeed. He said he had underestimated me so thoroughly that he had convinced himself sending me away was the kindest option. He said, "I convinced myself I was protecting you from her, but I was protecting myself from the truth about what I had become." I asked him why he had stopped calling. He said, "Because every time I picked up the phone, I would hear her voice in my head telling me that reaching out would undermine her authority, and I was too weak to resist it." He said he had not called because he was afraid of her. He said it plainly, without shame. And for the first time, I pitied him, not as a father, but as a man who had traded his dignity for a quiet life. I did not forgive him, not then, but I agreed to stay in contact. We exchanged emails, short ones at first about work, about books, about the weather, then longer ones. He told me about his childhood. I told him about the years in Spain that he had never asked about. It was not a reconciliation. It was a construction project, building something new on ground that had been salted. 2 months into our correspondence, my mother filed a legal request. She petitioned the court in our home city to have me declared legally estranged. Not for any practical reason. I was not seeking inheritance or making claims. She did it to finalize the narrative. She wanted a document that said, in the language of law, that I had abandoned the family, that the separation was my choice. She had found a lawyer willing to file the petition. The irony was not lost on me. The woman who had sent me away at 17 was now asking a judge to certify that I had left voluntarily. The woman who had not called me for 2 years was claiming abandonment. I received the notification while I was in Strasbourg preparing my testimony. I read it, set it down, and made a decision. I would not contest it. I would not respond. I would let her have her paper victory, because a document cannot change what happened. A judge cannot rewrite history, and I no longer needed the family's approval to confirm my existence. I called my father to tell him. He said, "I am sorry she did that." I said, "I know you are, but it is not your apology to make." He did not argue. The case in Strasbourg concluded successfully. My testimony was cited in the final opinion. Judge Herrera sent me a note that said, "The court appreciates precision. You delivered it." I framed it. It hangs in my apartment above the desk where I work. Mateo reached out a few months after the legal petition. He and Adelia had broken off the engagement. He did not blame me. He said the dinner had forced both of them to see things they had been avoiding. He said he was seeing a therapist. He said, "I spent my whole life believing I was the good child. I am starting to realize I was just the convenient one." I told him I was glad he was getting help. I told him I did not hate him. He cried. I did not. We have spoken 3 times since then. It is careful, it is limited, it is honest. That is enough for now. And then, 1 year after the dinner at El Faro, I learned the final piece. The one nobody had told me. The piece that redefined everything I thought I understood about my own childhood. My Aunt Isabella called me on the anniversary of my arrival in Spain. She was old now, her voice thinner, but her mind was still sharp. She said, "I have something to tell you. I should have told you years ago, but I did not know how." She told me that my mother had not chosen her randomly as a destination. She had chosen her because Isabella had lost a child decades earlier, a daughter stillborn. My mother had always resented that Isabella had experienced a loss she could not control, while she herself had 2 living children. When I became difficult, my mother saw an opportunity. She sent me to Isabella not to punish me, but to punish her sister. She sent me as a reminder of what Isabella had lost. She sent me as a weapon. I sat in silence for a long time after Isabella finished speaking. The revelation did not make me angry. It made me feel something stranger, a sort of clarity. I had never been a person to my mother. I had been a tool, a symbol, a variable in a family equation I had never been allowed to see. The exile had not been about discipline or growth or humility. It had been about inflicting pain on someone else using my life as the instrument. I thanked Isabella for telling me. I told her she had been the only real family I had ever known. She laughed and said, "You were the daughter I was waiting for. I just did not know it until you arrived." I hung up the phone and walked to the window. The Gothic quarter stretched out below me. The rooftops were warm in the evening light. The sea glowed at the edge of the city. I thought about the 17-year-old girl who had arrived in this country with a suitcase and €1,000, terrified and alone. I thought about how she had built a life out of nothing. I thought about how the family that had tried to erase her had failed. And I thought about the truth that had taken me 33 years to understand, that being exiled was the best thing that ever happened to me. Not because exile is good, but because survival is powerful. And I had survived, not as the daughter they wanted, not as the problem they discarded, but as myself, precise, honest, complete. The story of that dinner is over, but the story of what came after is still being written, and for the first time in my life, I am the one holding the pen. There is a question people ask when they hear this story. They ask whether I regret going to that dinner. The answer is no. I went because I needed to see the truth with my own eyes. I needed to stop imagining a version of my family that did not exist. The dinner gave me that. It gave me the clarity to stop hopping and start building. The broader implication is one I did not expect. I learned that exile is not always a punishment. Sometimes it is an opportunity to become who you were meant to be, away from the people who needed you to stay small. My mother sent me away to diminish me. Instead, she gave me the distance I needed to grow. She thought she was removing a problem. She was releasing a person who would go on to do things she could never have imagined. I think about the 17-year-old girl who arrived in Valencia with nothing. She could not have known that 15 years later, she would testify before a European court, own an apartment in the Gothic quarter, and sit across from a federal judge who saw her more clearly than her own mother ever did. She could not have known that the exile would become the foundation of her freedom. The people who tell you that family is everything are often the ones who have never been damaged by it. The truth is more complicated. Family can nourish you or starve you. And sometimes the most honest thing you can do is walk away from the table where you are being treated as a problem instead of a person. If this story resonated with you, I want you to know that you do not need permission to choose yourself. You do not need a dramatic confrontation or a legal document. You just need the courage to stop performing a role that was written for you by someone else. The first step is small. The next ones get easier. And one day, you wake up and realize that the life you built is yours. Not theirs. Yours. Thank you for listening to my story. If it stayed with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you want to follow along as I continue writing my own narrative, consider subscribing. Because the truth is this: I am still holding the pen, and I am not done yet.